One of the things is that I think a lot of times people don't really think of sparring as in like there's different styles of sparring or people spar differently. So if you look at, we talked about in this DVD, we talk about the pressurer, the runner, the angler, and the counter striker. And remembering, one of the things that I keep pointing out is that, of course, not everybody is just a counter striker. And, you don't just find somebody who's just a pressurer. They're always a combination of styles. But one of the things that it allows you to do when you start looking at in that perspective, you start breaking the fight compass down. You're saying, okay, there's 4 major styles, and then obviously you can mix those styles together, which give you the variations. What that does is it opens up a whole new game because you start looking at sparring in a whole different kind of way. A lot of times when you see guys spar, when you ask them, like, when you were out there, did you have any specific strategy? Were you trying to do specific things? They tend to be quite unclear about that. They're not always sure, entirely what they were trying to achieve. A lot of times it's just like 2 guys banging away at each other. But once you start, introducing people to the fight compass, what you find is that people start really genuinely developing a strategy when they approach different opponents. It gives you an opportunity to recognize certain traits, certain things that people do. So you go, okay, I see that guy's a runner, and I know that probably he's going to do 1 of 4 things. Now, again, in the DVD, we only talked about 4 strategies for each style. And the reason why we're doing that is, are we saying that those are the only 4 strategies? Of course not. There are a ton more, but it's kind of the starting block. It's like, if you came to me and you said, look, Rodney, I want to get better at my sparring, but where do I start? It would be pointless for me to give you so much information that there's way too much that you couldn't remember, but also it doesn't give you time to develop it. So in this introduction DVD to the Fight Compass, what we're trying to achieve here is we want to give you 4 fundamental things that you can go out and play right now. I mean, it's not going to take very long for you to understand those 4 things. It's not going to take you very long. You can do it on the first line and play them in. What I like about the Fight Compass is that you could start watching boxing matches or MMA matches or whatever you like to watch, and you could start saying, okay, that fighter, he's more of this, identifying and saying, okay, when I'm sparring, guys, this is probably what I'm going to come up against. I'm going to come up against 4 predominant styles. That's going to be the thing that they're predominant in, but they're going to have a variation of it. So if you look at what I do, is that I'm a pressurer, but I also have a variation in there as a counter striker. That does not mean that I don't play runner, and it doesn't mean that I don't play angler. I mean, I do play those in, and I think it's really important. Again, when you look at the Fight Compass and you look at, hey, hold on, there's 4 specific styles and then the variations, I can come in and I can really, really have fun with my sparring because I can come in one night and just say, I'm only going to play angler. Where on another night you say, I'm just going to come in and play runner. Where oftentimes in sparring, people aren't doing that, right? They're coming in, they're slogging away, they're doing round after round. They don't always have a strategy, they don't always have an idea of what they want to play or develop. And the Fight Compass gives them an opportunity to develop specific parts of the game. I mean, each style has a different kind of energy, a different a way of approaching the sparring match. Pressurers like exactly that. Pressure, move in, they're really strong, forward pressure, good solid stance. A runner is light on his feet, he's up on his toes, he's moving around, great evasive tactics. An angler knows how to use his body effectively, he knows how to maneuver his body into different kind of angles off the opponent, which is obviously, these are all great things you want to develop. Counter striker builds some timing, get your eye in. So if you come in and you say, look, I'm going to play different styles every night, you can imagine what you're going to do for your sparring game. You're really going to develop it. And if you look at it like that, you say, okay, well, look, there's only 4 strategies that Rodney's given us for pressurer. But remember, I'm a pressurer and a counter striker, so actually there's 8 strategies. So if I take 8 strategies, I take the pressurer strategies, I take the counter striker strategies, I put them together, I line them up, and I see how I can mix and match them and what would make the kind of the best combinations. So that would be, for example, if we did like a further DVD on the Fight Compass, that's kind of where we would look. We get a little bit more technical. Right now we're starting quite broad, and the idea always is to start off broad so you get a really good general idea of the subject matter, and then over time you want to start getting more and more focused and more into the subject, and that's really our intention for further DVDs. Okay, there's a few things we just want to cover quickly just before we get into the meat of the Fight Compass DVD. Just some things just to take note of, because it really depends on where your level of sparring is right now. Again, it's something I reiterate, no matter what, you always have to focus on your defense. You must make sure that you have good solid defense when you're working your sparring, because even though in the Fight Compass we break some of the rules, you'll see sometimes, when we're sparring in the Fight Compass, I might drop my hands to draw the opponent in. I'm taking for granted when you watch this DVD that you already have the solid background in the basics. If you don't have those basics, those foundation skills,
I would suggest that you go out and you buy the Championship Series Volume 1 because all those fundamental basics are on there. A couple of pointers just to take note of when you're working your sparring. These are the kind of core ideas when you spar, especially around movement, that you want to take note of. Again, all this stuff is covered on the Championship Series Volume 1, so I don't want to go into detail exactly on how the footwork is done because I've already covered that. But one of the things you want to take note of when you're sparring, this is a really, really important part of sparring when you move around, is that anytime you move to the lead hand side of your opponent, when you go to the lead hand side, you can either back up and move your body away from him, or you can cut it close. This is an important thing. And you can do that even when you're not striking. So if I'm sparring Nuno and I want to go in close to him, I can do that if I go to his lead hand side, even if I'm not striking. Or as we're sparring and I want to move around, I can move back. Same thing. So I can either back up and circle, right? So back up as he's coming, back up and circle off. Or I can go towards him and circle. And the reason why I can pull that off, even when I'm not hitting, is because he has to re-square his hip. As Nuno stands exactly still, as I move this way, I'm getting a better angle, which means that Nuno has to re-square in order to face me. And that's an important point. Here's the thing. When you move to the rear hand side, now you have to worry about all guns fire. What do I mean by that? When I move to the lead hand side, if Nuno doesn't re-square his hip, and even when he's trying to re-square his hip, he's limited in what he can actually do. All right, in order for Nuno to fire all his shots, we have to be square to each other. Now Nuno can fire anything he wants. As he stands still, as I move this way, he's now, if he doesn't move, he's limited to, and he could probably fire a jab, but the rest of his punches are not going to be that effective. But when I move to the inside, he's always going to be square. So let's look at that again. When I move to the outside, he has to re-square. So I've got a little bit of time that I can play with. When I move to the inside, he's already square. That means all his punches are going to be super hard. So anytime you find yourself moving to the inside and you're not hitting, you want to make sure that you are backing up and let the opponent come to you. Okay? So let me say that again. If I'm sparring Nuno and he's punching and I'm just working my defense and I feel I have to move to his rear hand side, I'm going to back up and let him come to me if I'm not hitting. The only time you step into the inside, okay, you step and you move towards that direction is when you're hitting. So be it the fact that you are attacking or you're working a counter attack. So if Nuno threw a cross at me and I stepped out, that's fine. I can move towards him, but because I'm hitting. So I'm always making him think that he has to be on the defense. I don't want to just move to the inside but not hit. Because if I do that, I'm going to walk into all guns fire. That means he's going to be able to rain down any punch that he would like to, put on me. So I want to make sure that as I step to the inside, I am hitting when I do that. If I decide I want to go to his rear hand side, but I'm not going to be hitting, I'm going to make sure I'm backing away. So we'll recap that quickly. Lead hand side, I can move towards him without hitting because I'm closing off the line and he has to re-square, so I've got a bit of time to play with. I can also just back up and move away from him. When I go to his rear hand side, I'm going to make sure that if I am moving to the inside and to his rear, I'm doing what? I am hitting when I do that. Or if I move to his rear and I'm just find myself defending, I'm never just going to defend and move to the inside because I'm going to walk in all his punches. What I want to make sure is that I back up and let him come to me. If you keep to that, that's really important. So no matter what you see on the Fight Compass DVD, you want to make sure that you work that in your footwork as well. Okay, one of the things that you hear me talk about a lot, especially in the CMD program, is I talk about keeping a tight structure, tight economical structure, keep everything tight, don't make any holes. Now, the reason why I coach it that way is because a lot of times when I'm going on seminars or I'm going to gyms around the world, I find that, people are so focused and so concerned on getting power and speed, but they don't really focus on working their defense. And my kind of understanding of the stand-up game is this, is that if you have good defense, if I can ride the storm, so to speak, I'm always going to be in a position to counterattack. What do I mean by that? So if I have really good defense and it's hard for Nuno to get in, I'm able to pick my shots more carefully and I can see the openings. But if I'm out here and all I'm worried about is getting hit and trying to get out of the way, and I'm trying to do this, it's going to be pretty difficult, and I'm going to find myself running around more and not actually putting myself in a position where I can either attack or counterattack. With that said, keeping the tight structure and having that base is really how we teach the fundamentals. It's for the beginners. Once Nuno knows that, once I know Nuno has a really good tight structure, I know that he has that game that he can fall back onto. That's an important point. He can fall back onto it. So, for example, if I say to him, hey Nuno, play a little bit of an attribute-based boxing game, open up a little bit more, you can drop your hands and things like that, which gives him a lot more openings and opportunity to score. It's a much more versatile game. But I know that if I put Nuno under pressure, he can go back to a tight economical structure and a tight game. That's the whole point of having that tight game. So he's not just a one-dimensional fighter. The problem is you have these guys that are loose, they're all over the place, and then when they get outmatched, they have nothing to go back to. They only have this. Now what happens is you end up just taking punches for round after round, because this is the only game you know how to play. So it's okay to be able to drop your hands and play from this, so to get different angles, and like we did throughout the Fight Compass, introduce you to strategy like attack by drawing, which is opening up, okay? But the bottom line is I still have that tight structure, that basic foundation CM game to go back to. So if I'm playing this kind of thing, but all of a sudden I'm getting hurt, I can always go back and work my tight structure, and then when I feel confident again and my focus is back, now I can start playing and open up the game a little bit. So really the dynamics of the CMD program is first coach really functional, basic, performance-based game, meaning that you want to be tight economical structure, you want to have great balance, you want to have good defense, and you want to focus on your conditioning. Once somebody has that and he has his defense down and you know that he can ride the storm, so when I'm punching him hard, he can always go back to good defense. Once I see that he's got that, then we expand it and I say, okay, now let's play all the other stuff that you see in boxing. This is the important point. I'm not saying that playing those attribute-based games in boxing is bad. I'm just saying it's bad if that's the only thing you know how to play, and that's how you get taught from the beginning. Because then you have no foundation skills. You don't know how to defend effectively, and if you don't know how to defend, it doesn't matter how hard Nuno can hit or how fast he hits. If he can't defend, none of the power or speed is going to make any difference, because I'm going to be jacking him up, and that's the bottom line, right? So he could be really fast and hit really hard, but the bottom line is if I'm catching him and I'm hitting him hard and he's walking into punch after punch after punch, what does it matter how fast or how hard he can hit? So focus on your foundation skills. You need the foundation skills. You get the Championship Series Volume 1. That's the really important part of it. It teaches you how to stay in the hunchback position, teaches you basic CM1, how to work your defense. And that's really important. Once you have that, you can open up and you can play around. But you still always have that game to go back to, and that is the thing that you need to remember.
Welcome to the pressurist style. The basic style of this kind of opponent is to constantly push forward, T-rexing the opponent's arms and getting him to backpedal on his back foot. Pressurists have good solid defense or often have a strong jaw. They also like to use footwork that adopts cutting the ring off and stopping their opponent from escaping their advance. Many bigger opponents adopt this kind of style, but not always. These types of fighters often have knockout power or have a keen eye for mistakes. The bottom line is, these kind of fighters, the pressurists, like to force their opponents to panic and make mistakes.
All right, so the first strategy we're going to look at for the pressurist style is something called T-rexing, and it's a really, really important component. It's one of the most important parts of the strategy if you want to become successful as a pressurist style. So I'm going to use Nuno for this. He's going to help me out with this. Essentially, this is the idea. When we talk about T-rexing the opponent's punches, we want to take the sting out of those punches. We want to take the power out of them as well. So what happens is that if I'm standing out here, out on the periphery, this is where we call the rim shot range, and Nuno throws a punch, that's where he has maximum power in his jab and cross. Obviously, as he steps forward, he's going to be able to drive that punch right through. So on the pressurist style, when we start talking about T-rexing, the idea is that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the length away from Nuno's jabs and crosses, his power punches, and start pushing them back. The second thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get Nuno to go on his back foot. So I'm trying to get him to back up. Now, although as I get the distance on his jab and cross, I start closing them down and I start making it harder for him to jab and cross, that doesn't prevent Nuno from throwing hooks and uppercuts and those kind of close quarter punches. But it's really difficult to do that if you're backing up and you're falling back into your stance, right? You need to have good base in order to effectively use hooks and uppercuts. So those are the two things I'm trying to do. One, trying to get his hands to basically start cutting back, so eventually he gets to this position where he really can't throw the jabs and crosses, and that's what we mean by T-Rexing. Even though he can throw hooks and uppercuts still, the thing is he's going to be trying to do this on his back foot, so he's backing up, he's putting all his weight on his back leg when he's trying to do that. And so those are the kind of two things that I'm looking for when I work my T-Rexing action. The hallmark of the T-Rexing action is working the CM2 defense. So CM1, which is our basic defense, means that I'm out on the periphery, I'm out in the rim shot range. When Nuno throws punches at me, I'm just working my defense, so I'm out here. There's not a whole lot of body motion going on, and it's mainly my arms that are working the defense. When I go into CM2, this is where I start working more of an angle with my body, and what I'm really trying to achieve is to be an evasive target. So instead of being square to my opponent, I'm now going to start creating an angle so there's less target as I'm coming in. So it's going to make it harder for him to hit me. And a lot of his punches are basically just going to, just skim me and go over the top. That's what I'm looking for. So we'll give you just a quick demonstration of this. We're going to slow it down for the instruction part so you can really see what we're doing. Nuno's going to back up for me when he throws his jabs and crosses right now. Remember, I'm the pressurer, so I'm pushing forward. I'm steam training going forward. He's going to back up. So one, that it gives me more time to practice it, but also two, that I can play with the distance a little bit more. Now, when he backs up, you're going to see what happens. If I start slowly working in my CM2 as I rock forward, as I get closer and I put the pressure on, his hands start moving back. And that's what I'm looking for. That's essentially the T-Rexing action. So when I'm out here, we're moving around and I'm working CM1, when I decide to go, that's the time that I'm going to move into CM2, get that T-Rex, slowly get in, and get him to T-Rex his hands. This is a really important part of being a pressurer, because once you can get the person to T-Rex his hands and you can take the sting and power out of his jabs and crosses, you're now in a position where you can counterattack effectively from that style. But you first have to put the pressure on. Remember, the pressurer, not always, but a lot of the times, is a much bigger and stronger opponent. So the whole idea is that you're pushing forward, you're trying to keep on top of your opponent, you don't want to give him any space. So you're not going to be out here and striking from this position, you're going to be pushing forward, rocking forward. So just look at that CM2 a little bit closer. If I'm standing and I'm facing the camera, and imagine that I took a cord or a rope and I tied it across the gym, and it's just really just underneath my chin line, right? So my neckline is running across there. I'm essentially moving underneath that rope each time I move, and I'm rocking with my elbows. And you notice what I do is that I don't stay in one position. So as I'm finished here, I rock back, and I keep coming forward. And that's my defense. And I'm also angling my body slightly to make more of an angle in my body so it's not straight on, so I'm not giving him a perfect target to hit. So we'll do that again one more time. Moving forward, rocking, getting Nuno to T-Rex his hands, and as his hands start coming back, that's the time for me to counterattack. So that's the first strategy that you want to use if you're trying to develop a pressurer style. You want to get your opponent's jabs and crosses to move back to T-Rex, get him to step back and basically put all his weight on his back foot, so it puts you in a position to counterattack.
In this example, we have Costa with the white gloves. He's demonstrating the T-Rexing action out of the CM2. Okay, now we're looking at the second strategy that you want to try and develop if you want to develop your pressurer style. This one is called the diving board punch. And really we use this off our jabs and our crosses.
There's a really good reason why we do this. One, it creates an aerodynamic frame, which means that I'm putting myself in a good defensive position and I'm not creating holes. And that's probably the most important thing. But second of all, it enables me to work out of that CM2, that T-Rexing action, as I T-Rex my opponent's arms. The analogy that I've always used when I travel around the world and I do seminars is that imagine you standing on a diving board and you dive off, say, 2 floors high. And as you dive, if you take your hands away from your face, you can imagine what's going to happen as you hit the water. You're going to pretty much take your head off. The diving board is exactly that. It's like if you're standing on the diving board and when you dive, you don't dive with your hands away from your face, you pull your hands in so that you create that aerodynamic frame and that you protect your head when you enter the water. So when we work the diving board jab and cross, you're going to see pretty much the same thing. It's not an overhand, so that's really important to understand. When we talk about overhands later on, you'll see there's a different mechanics in how that is thrown. Often when people throw overhands, you are going lower than your opponent and then coming over the top. Also, overhands have a lot more of a swing and an arc motion. This is still coming out of the jab cross. So let me just demonstrate this to you first before I just show it on Nuno. When I work the diving board, I go a little bit over. As I go a little bit over, I dive into that punch. So it's like the diving board action that you see when somebody dives into a pool, same motion, diving over the top. Okay? I'm coming over the top for a very specific reason as well, which I'll show you now. But let's just look at this. So when I'm facing Nuno, and I'm working the first strategy, which is to T-Rex his arms, I have to obviously be aware where Nuno is, and I'm not going to be able to fire a diving board jab and cross, or even just a diving board jab. He can do it on his own. But I'm not going to be able to do that if I'm right on top of him. So I have to gauge the distance. Remember, I'm trying to push Nuno back. He's moving back, hopefully, so that's creating some space. So when I work my CM2 and I'm T-Rexing, I'm not trying to I could do it if I want to go into the clinch, but for now, just we're talking about boxing. I'm not going to go into this position and then just basically crash into him and take his punches away, which I could. Like I said, I could do that to crash and then get into the clinch. But I'm not trying to do that right now. So even though I'm T-Rexing his arms, I'm keeping just enough space that when I'm ready, boom, boom, I can fire that diving board punch. And you notice what I did there was I came over the top. Now, a couple of good reasons for that. A lot of times you might have noticed if you're sparring and you're at the same level, and I fire a jab and Nuno fires a jab, we might run into each other. That happens a lot. Or because we're at the same level, when we fire, we don't get clean shots off because it's hard to get in. One, you're worried about getting hit, but two, it's hard to get that distance. So with the diving board action punch, what you're doing is as you're moving, you're coming over the top and clearing his guard. Very, very important. You want to clear that guard. Second thing I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm inside my structure when I do this. I'm working my hunchback stance. So as Nuno punches, I'm coming in. Then I'm T-Rexing, there's a space, boom, boom, and I fire the diving board action. Now this is just the second strategy. Straight after I get that diving board action, nothing stops me from going to other combinations. So I could, of course, go T-Rex, diving board, bam, bam, and then continue with anything I want to. So go into my hook lines and then continue a basic combination. But it's a really good strategy to create that pressure and is an entry technique into the pressure style. So that's your second strategy, diving board punches. Remember, you're firing it from the top of your head. If you look at it from the side, all lines are closed when I do this. I'm not doing this. I'm not playing this game with my hands down. I make sure I protect my head on the cross. Look at it from this side. It's diving, it's a power punch, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to push my whole body into it. One tip there that'll help you. A lot of times what I do when I fire punches is I cock my shoulder. And what that does is it gives me easier action on the dive, but also drives a lot of power in. So you'll see often when I throw punches that I lift my shoulder. As I lift my shoulder, I fire it out. So sometimes people will say, well, we can see the validity of doing the diving board punch, but it's pretty difficult to get that angle. How do you get that angle? So this is the easiest way to do it. You lift your shoulder up. As you lift your shoulder, immediately it dives. So that's the key. I try and do that on both punches. So it'll be lift, lift to get the diving board. Then you put it together, you got your diving board action. So use your shoulder pop. As your shoulder comes in, watch it, your elbow doesn't flare. So you don't want to go pop my shoulder and flare my elbow. Shoulder comes up, boom, over the top. And if you see when I do that, shoulder up, perfect diving board punch. Still not an overhand. It's not an overhand. It's still a jab and a cross.
In this example, Costa again with the white gloves, working the diving board action out of T-Rexing and CM2.
we're looking at the third strategy as a pressure style that you want to develop. This one is what I term in the frame of disruptors. So if we start talking about different kinds of techniques or strategies that you can use, this is what I call a disruptor. It's a very unique way of getting a certain kind of energy on your opponent. So what I'm going to show you anyway as we do it. There's a lot of martial arts styles that tend to use this kind of technique, but I was taught this specific way of doing this cutting action, what I call a cutting punch, in boxing actually when I was about 16 years old. So I've been using it for quite a long time. Right now, when I use a cut, especially as a pressure, because that's my specific style, is I try never work it off the rear hand. I don't find it as effective, but that doesn't mean that you can't train it off your rear hand. But right now I'm going to just show it off the lead hand because that works the best for me. So when Nuno throws his cross, the idea is I'm going to hit his cross with the side of my arm, with the forearm, the inside of the forearm. As I hit it with the inside of the forearm, I'm going to use the deflection to continue my punch and drive it into a jab. Okay, so as you see what I'm doing is I'm doing a couple of things when he throws that punch. As he throws that punch, what you'll notice is one, it disrupts his hand, so it sends it off in the opposite direction, but it also knocks out his balance a little bit. So we'll switch it up quickly and see another angle. So watch as he goes, boom, there. Fire fast one, boom, there. Okay, so you'll see what happens. As Nuno fires a fast cross and I get in, I not only knock his hand off, but his body wobbles a little bit. And that's essentially what I want. Anytime you can get your opponent off balance, you're in a good position, because once you start driving forward, he's still out of balance. And even though he's trying to counterattack, his body's still trying to recapture that balance, which is a good strategy for you, because as long as he's out of balance, you are always going to be the person who's going to be dominating the fight. So as he fires that cross, I hit it with my forearm. As I hit it with my forearm, I turn it into a jab. So I'm not using a vertical fist. I'm turning it into a jab, and then I would follow up. So we'll switch back up. Okay, still here with this disruptor, right? As he fires, boom, I hit it. Now, as I get it, the idea is for me to push that in. As I get that reaction, see that reaction? That's as a pressure where I continue to come in. Now, of course, at this stage, I'm starting to add tactics together. Now, let's say Nuno fired a punch, I get the disruptor, I hit Nuno. It didn't do what I thought it was going to do. He starts hitting back. I'm straight into CM2, closing the line, diving board, and then I work my combinations. Okay. And it's important to note at this point is that just because I say I'm a pressurer, it doesn't mean I'm pressuring all the time, the whole round. Pressuring means that predominantly, if you look at a 3-minute round or 3 rounds, that's what I was doing most of the time. But, obviously, if you're pressuring somebody and you're not able to knock him out, you're going to have to pull back and then try again. But it's a specific way of working your technique. So we'll look at that again. Hitting with the forearm, slow it down. All right, go again. Slow it down. Hit with the forearm and then turn into the punch. Now remember, Nuno's trying to hit me straight in the face. So as he goes for the face, that's why it works really well. And I'm catching him pretty much on the front part of his forearm when I do this. All right, so he goes in, boom. Next important point, you notice how I always keep my rear hand up high. I don't want to do things like this where I drop my hands because that's coming next. So I want to be aware of that. So as Nuno punches, boom, I hit him one, then I follow up with my combinations. That's really important. So that's a disruptor. The idea is to disrupt his energy. So what I mean by that? Essentially what happens is when you do that to people, besides the fact that it disrupts his energy on his body, so there it pushed Nuno's punch off and it knocked him out of balance, it also messes with his head. So his focus shifts. He starts focusing on what I was doing rather than focusing what he should be doing in the game. And that's always a good tactic as well. There's a whole bunch of disruptors that we use in the CMD program. That's just one, but it's an essential one when you work in the pressurer style. You want to add that in. So if as a pressurer, I might be out here working CM, just CM1, working the periphery, seeing what this guy's doing, throwing punches back. I see an opportunity, I use the disruptor, and then I'm on my opponent. Then I'm pushing forward, and I'm working those first 2 strategies. I'm trying to T-Rex Nuno's arms, and I'm doing a lot of diving board punches, followed by my combinations.
In this example, Costa with the white gloves is working cutting action off Nuno's punches.
we're looking at the fourth and final basic strategy for the pressurist style. This is more of a conceptual idea. It's not so much a technical thing, although technique does play into it. If you don't have a good jab and a good cross, and you're not able to keep tight, you're going to have a problem with this. But the idea is really this, is that when you're a pressurer, when you decide to go, when you go in, you're keeping all your punches heavy. So what do I mean by that? You know, often you'll see guys out here, and they're doing light punches, speed punches. They're trying to test to see what is this guy going to do, what kind of defense does he use. I mean, that's very, very common strategy. And the pressurer might still use that. But once you decide to go in, once you decide to move in on this guy, you're keeping all punches heavy. That means you're driving your whole body behind your punch. So I'm doing one or two things there. Essentially, I'm trying to fire a fast power punch. So I'm trying to obviously hit Nuno hard, but what I do is I also put a little bit of pressure behind it. So I make it heavy by doing that. So instead of just going boom, hit hard and pull back, which is one way, I'll go boom, hit hard, but push a little bit into it. Okay? So I put a little bit of a push into it. Now, I want to be careful when I do that I don't push into it and leave my hand there. So even though I'm punching, you know, and I'm trying to push, I'm not leaving my hand in there. It's still going to be coming back. And that changes the dynamics completely. Now, what am I doing with that? I'm trying to put Nuno under pressure. So as I go in and I push, I start putting him under pressure. A couple things happen. One, he gets so focused on trying to defend and keep his hands up so he doesn't get hit in the head, he leaves his body open. So as I'm pushing, it's a great time to go for a body shot. Or, what some guys do, as you push and you hit them, they stick their hands out. So, boom, they feel that pressure, boom, there's that time to come with an overhand, or you could use diving punch, a diving board punch. So the idea is that instead of just standing out here, firing quick punches, or just popping with some power, bam, you want to pop with the power and then push. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. And again, it's a great strategy for me because I'm bigger than Nuno, and if I can off-balance him, then it puts him in a bad spot. Because as you off-balance somebody, the angle of their body changes. Like right there, what happened was, as I hit Nuno, he facing that direction, which is, he has to turn back in order to hit me. Now, in turning back, for example, boom, he walks into my cross. So that happens every single time. Okay, so that's essentially what I'm trying to do. So I'm using it as a strategy. So you would be, for example, you would be out here, you'd be punching, you're working your CM1, you're striking nice and light, you decide to go in, you start working your CM2, you see the time, boom, boom, and when you do those diving board punches, you put some pressure behind it, so put some push. So again, not just striking with power, but striking with power and a push, and then bring the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth punch in. So that's really important. So that's the fourth and final strategy. It's really a concept. So, you know, essentially what you're trying to do is put some pressure behind your punches, use your weight, drive into it. Be careful that you don't start, you know, swinging for the fences. Really important. You still want to keep everything tight. Be careful that you don't drop your head forward so you start walking into things. Even though I'm hitting Nuno and I'm pushing, you'll notice I'm always inside my stance as I do that. I never, ever, ever come out of that position. I want to make sure I protect my head at all costs.
In this example, Costa with the white gloves is working the heavy punches, keeping the punches heavy in the pressurist style against Nuno with the black gloves. Okay, let's do a quick recap on the pressurist style. So 4 basic strategies to start developing your pressurist style, right? First one was make sure that when you decide to go in, you're going to T-Rex the opponent's arms. How you're going to do that, you're going to work CM2 by rocking forward with your defense. Now again, for the purpose of the tape, I keep just, you know, working the same kind of rhythm, but you can break the rhythm up. So when I say move forward, I can go 1, 2, and then 3. See how I switched that up? I didn't just go left, right. I can switch it up. So, and I would suggest that you do that, right? So you would use your CM2 to T-Rex this guy's hands, wait for the right opportunity, try and use diving board punches,
when you use your diving board punches, you're going to do what? You're going to put a lot of pressure behind it, push the guy, so it opens him up more, right? And when he opens up, then you're going to go for those open targets. The last thing that we did there was that when Nuno fires a punch, I'm going to disrupt it by cutting into it. Now, a lot of times I'm disrupting on the outside, meaning that I'm still out here defending, then all of a sudden I disrupt. So I use the disruptor as an entry technique. I enter with that, and then I continue exactly what I was doing. Nuno's backing up, I'm doing diving board, working my CM2 if I have to, and then obviously putting some pressure and some push behind my punches. So that's just recapping on the pressure style. Those are the 4 basic strategies that you want to work on.
This final example in the pressure style, Costa with the white gloves, is putting all of the 4 strategies together for the pressure style. Welcome to this section on the runner style. The basic style of this kind of opponent is to get in and out with strikes. They like to hit and run. They are often light and shorter opponents, but again not always, have good footwork and hand speed. They often don't have the punching power, so they like to pick their target off over time. They also like to force their opponents to panic and make mistakes.
Looking at the first strategy now to develop your runner style. And again, remember, not always, but runners tend to be smaller, lighter opponents. Nuno's really good at the style because of his size, and you'll often see guys like, the size of Nuno that work that runner style a lot. So when we start looking at the first basic strategy that uses a runner style, we're looking at quick, fast combinations, but very important, combined with evasive tactics. Okay, so it's not just a matter of being out here, firing quick combinations, and then moving. You have to make sure that you put evasive tactics in. Lots of reasons for that. One of the most important reasons is because if you're a runner and you're smaller and lighter than your opponent, you're going to be, if you're sparring a bigger and stronger opponent, he's just going to hunt you down. Wherever he sees an opportunity, he's going to try and hit you hard. So you want to be as an elusive target as you possibly can, and the one way to do that is by working your evasive tactics. So what you do is, this is the strategy that I coach all my guys, a basic strategy, and then obviously you can build out of it and play your own thing. But what I tell them is that you want to use evasive, when somebody's punching, you want to use your evasive tactics to get in, use fast combinations, and use your evasive tactics to get out. So very, very important. I'm going to repeat that. You use evasive tactics to get in, fire your fast combinations, and use your evasive tactics to get out. What evasive tactics can you use as a runner style? Like, we're talking about really basic functional stuff. Now, you probably recognize terms like bob and weave and those kind of things, but for the most part, most people that train in CM are always thinking as far as a mixed martial art game. So, being down here, if Nuno's throwing punches with my head is not a good idea for a lot of reasons. One, I might walk into a knee, bam, okay? I might get elbowed. There's a lot of things that can happen when my head's down there. So I really, really only focus on a few things here. The one is to work a modified duck. So I go underneath Nuno's punches. You see how my elbows keep tight to my body, and I just use my legs as I go down. The other one is to work just the slipping action from side to side. So as I slip from side to side, my hands stay by my face and my body moves. Obviously, there's a little bit of leg movement, but it's mainly body. So, modified duck and slip side to side. Those are the ones that I most commonly use, and they cover most of the high line punches. And most of the time when you're working evasive tactics is because somebody's trying to headhunt you. Okay, so if I'm standing in front of Nuno and he throws a punch, that's my duck. All right, if he throws a punch, that's my slip, and there's my slip. It doesn't matter which way you land up. It's just very important that as you're slipping punches, that your hands are always up by your face. So let's look at that strategy again. You want to try, if you're going to develop a runner style, which also means you have to have great cardio, you want to develop quick, fast combinations. So you want to make your combinations really fast. Most important thing is, as I'm out here and I'm defending and I'm the runner and I want to get in, when I decide to go in, I'm not going to use the same thing as a pressurer does, because this wouldn't be a good strategy for me if I'm smaller. I'm going to make sure that as I'm defending, I'm slipping, boom, throw my fast combinations, and then use my slips to get out. Because a lot of times, once you've offloaded your combination and the guy's preoccupied with defending it, as you move away, he's going to chase you. So you don't want to go evasive tactics to get in, fast combination, and then stop, boom, because then you're just going to get knocked out. So you want to make sure you use fast combinations as you come in, and then evasive tactics to get out. One important point there. When you get out, try not back up in a straight line. You want to make sure that when you use your evasive tactics to get out, that you always circle off. So that's really important. The circle off puts you in a position that he is not in a square position to hit you. If you just come out like this, and you come out, he's going to hunt you down. So you want to make sure that as you come out, you circle off. So he has to re-square his hip. So that's the first strategy. Quick, fast combinations combined with evasive tactics.
In this example, Kay, with the black gloves and black shorts, is working evasive tactics with fast combinations, coming back to evasive tactics as he moves out for the runner style.
Okay, looking at the second strategy now that you use in the runner style. In this one, we want to use feints and false attacks to gain a reaction on the opponent so we can basically set up our combination. Let's just look at the difference between those two concepts. What's the difference between a feint and a false attack? When we talk about a false attack, normally what that means is that I start the action on one line, so let's say I'm going to Nuno's head, and I will end it in that same line, somewhere up on his head level. Okay, so it's always going to be in the same area, same line of attack. A feint attack is the other way, meaning that I start in one line, but I end up in the opposite line. So another line underneath it, for example. So when we talk about a false attack, the first basic false attack, the one that I really love and the one that works always, is essentially at least the false jab. And the false jab is this. When I'm standing in front of Nuno, I fire a jab and he defends, fire a jab and he defends, then I pretend, and then I push forward. And the reason why it works is quite simple, is that a person's going to defend the first punch, defends the second punch. When I throw the third punch, he thinks it's coming. You see how his hand went back? Boom, and then I hit him. So we'll change the angle. So you can see this. Now, where this is really good is if you have somebody that has more of a traditional defensive mechanism that they use, which I mean by that is like parrying, for example, is more traditional. So if Nuno patted my hand is a good example. Right, so he pats, I pretend, boom, and I catch him. Right, so it's a pretty good move. Now, essentially that's a false attack. The second false attack that we want to look at is to go the other way around. This time around I'm going to go to his head, but I'm going to start off in a straight line, end off in a curved line using a hook, but it's still in the same level. So when I do this false attack this time, I go jab, jab, pretend to go jab, and then fire a hook. Again, if Nuno's using more of a traditional style of defense where he's parrying or patting punches, he's going to expose his head for that, which is going to make it much better for me. So if he went, for example, pat, pat, boom, boom, and then I catch it, because his hand is still going to be out. He's still thinking there's another punch coming behind that. So those are the two basic false attacks I use all the time. It works
equally well when somebody's working CM, because you still have to move your hand in to defend, and then you take it back. So even on that one where I'm going to the hook line, Nuno would go defend, defend, he would defend, and then I would catch it, right? I'm always trying to, with my hooks though, go as deep in as I possibly can, especially when somebody's working the CM defense, because I know that he knows that it's a good idea to always grab the back of your head if you can. Because essentially, hooks don't always just land in front of your face. You can also hook somebody behind the head. That's, from a self-defense point of view, is really effective because it's the easiest place to knock somebody out. Okay, so let's just look at those two again. First one is a false jab. I go jab, jab, pretend to jab, and then push it through. The second one is a false jab, but it's going to turn into a hook. So I go jab, jab, pretend, and then fire my hook. Right, so we'll do it one more time on the side so you can see. Okay, so jab, jab, pretend to jab, and then push through. Second one, jab, jab, pretend to jab, and then hook. Now again, I said in the beginning, we use, in the runner style, false and feint attacks to create opening, okay, or at least to create an apprehension on the opponent so I can come in and continue with my counter strikes, or at least my combinations. So I wouldn't be just doing this. I wouldn't be going jab, jab, pretend, boom, hit him and stop, okay? It would be jab, jab, pretend, bam, and then I would continue, and again, strategy again. If he starts hitting me back, I'm using evasive tactics, and I'm circling off, making sure I don't stand in front of him. Next thing we look at in the second strategy is feint attacks, right? So on feint attacks, again, the difference is I will start in a high line and end in a low line. Now, there's lots of different variations, but I'll just give you the concept so then you can kind of make your own. Essentially, you can start off high, end off low, right? So I might fire a hard jab, boom, pretend jab, and then the cross would be the hard one. Okay, so look at that again. I would fire a hard jab, pretend. You see how I pick my hand up? It's almost like I'm going to palm him in the face. I give him more to look at, all right? This kind of, you know, I'm getting that reaction from him that I'm looking for. If I just go jab, jab, I may not get a reaction, although that does work sometimes. But I found that if you go jab and then go like that, see, straight away, because he sees this huge thing coming towards him, go, what's that? Okay, so you go jab, boom, and then bam, fire the cross. Now your cross is the one that's meant to be hitting hard, and again, if you're the runner, you're going to come back up, fast combination, boom, 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 evasive tactics to get back out. Now, you can switch that the other way around. You can go pretend to go low to come up high. So the way that it may work is you may go high, pretend to go low, then come up high. Okay, so let's look at that again. All right, I go high, pretend to go low, and then come up high. So I pretend to fire a low jab that's nowhere near, of course, so it's just a feint, and then I come up and I complete it with the right cross. Now, if he's got more of a traditional style of defense, even better for me, okay? So, for example, let's say every time I went a jab to the body, Nuno pats it with his front hand. Very common, right? That's great. So when I go high, he defends. When I go low, he thinks it's going, boom, and then I catch him. That's the whole idea of a feint. So as he thinks that this is going to go down, he parries it, but it's not. I'm not even trying to get it. I'm just making him pull his hand down. That cross comes in. Like anything when you fire combinations, right, you want to make sure that all lines are closed. It doesn't help going hard jab, pretend to go, and then do this, because you're going to walk into something. So you notice when I do this, I go jab, pretend, but this hand is up by my face to protect my head. Now I was just using my lead hand there. Of course you can switch that around, okay? So, I mean, for example, I could go, you know, throw a jab cross, I could go pretend to go with a cross and then go jab to the body. So there I feinted high and finished off low. And then again, continue with my combination. So you can switch it up. But that's just the basic idea. So let's just recap that quickly. A false attack is an attack that starts on one line and ends in that line. So I do a proper one, I do a proper one, I pretend, and then I push through. The second one was, I did a proper one, pretend, and then hook. And see how I shuffle my body a little bit out just to get a better angle? A feint attack is a little bit opposite to that, meaning that I pretend to go high, but what I'm actually trying to do is go low, okay? Or I pretend to go low, but what I'm actually trying to do is go high.
So that's the next strategy you want to put in for your runner style. It's really, really important. When you start combining that with your evasive tactics and fast combinations and working in feints and false attacks, you're well on your way to becoming a runner.
In this example, Nuno with the black gloves is working false and feint attacks, working out of the running style against Costa with the white gloves.
Okay, now we're looking at the third strategy to develop your runner style. This one is modified ducks to overhands. Overhands are really important for somebody who is a runner. Remember again, not always of course, but a lot of times runners are smaller and lighter opponents. You have to be quick on your feet, which means if you're smaller and lighter, often if you do spar different kinds of bodies, you're going to find that you're going to have trouble with the taller guys, right? Because he'll keep you away with his jab, and it's going to be hard for you just to get in and work just normal boxing combinations. So Nuno's pretty good with this, so I'm going to use him for this. Okay, essentially the idea is that he would do a modified duck, and out of the modified duck, as he gets the duck, he would fire the overhand. So it's important that he's in a semi-upright position, still, obviously crouched down, blocking everything out, being in his hunchback position, so that I'm aiming for his head. I go to the head, he ducks, and then an overhand comes over the top. Now, you see the difference there, where that overhand comes in compared to, say, a diving board punch. That is more in between a cross and a hook than necessarily just, a cross, for example. So the idea is that he's getting more of an angle on that. He has to make an L shape into his arm in order to get up there. Now, again, as he goes low, he gets a lot of reach on that punch as he's coming out of it. He's flying up to the top. The nice thing about an overhand is if you do it that way, a lot of people don't see it coming, right? So they end up getting caught with it. Because if you notice, a lot of times when guys are taller, and the taller guys when they spar, they tend to stand quite upright, right? They're quite upright. They like to use their reach. So this is a good strategy. If I'm standing upright, I'm trying to use my reach, and duck, boom, and it comes over the top, I'm not going to see that. Another thing you often note, especially in the more kind of traditional boxing game, is like taller guys tend to leave their hands low. They do this, which is not a good idea, because even though I go with the jab and I miss, when I bring my hand back, he's going to catch me with that overhand. So that third strategy is doing a modified duck. Remember, your modified duck is your elbows are still in. You're just going under the punch, and then you're coming over the top with the overhand. Can you overhand with the lead hand? Absolutely, you can. But it's always more effective off the rear hand. And again, it's not about having tons of stuff that you know. It's about having a few things that work really well for you. And that's really part of this DVD, is that just the 4 strategies in the run and the 4 strategies in the pressure style is going to, just that in itself, if you train it and you hone it, you're going to get really good at that game. Okay, so one more time. In front of Nuno, fire the jab, boom, there we go. And he gets that overhand. So for me, it's really important that I get into a habit, especially when I'm sparring smaller or lighter opponents. I do what? I don't dance around here with my hands out here, because the guy's going to catch me. He's going to be very evasive, and he's going to be firing those overhands. So I'm always making sure I bring my hand back to my face. That's really important.
In this example, Nuno with the black gloves is working the modified duck to the overhand while working the runner style against Costa with the white gloves.
All right, looking at the fourth and final strategy now for the runner. This one is more of a concept. The idea is that as a runner, you want to have really good footwork. And again, you're going to have to be pretty conditioned to pull a lot of this stuff off. When you do your footwork, you want to have non-rhythmical footwork. You want to make it as, confusing for the opponent to pick up on what you're doing as possible. So when I say non-rhythmical, it essentially means this. You often see people make this mistake when they spar, especially when they're moving and they're using footwork, is that myself and Nuno might be sparring, but we start moving and we keep moving in the same direction. Now, as Nuno figures that out, and he figures out that I keep moving in the same direction, he's going to, like what he should do, he's going to cut me off and he's going to use it to his advantage. So when I say non-rhythmical footwork, what I mean is trying to change your footwork up as much as you can. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. It's just deception, really, is that I can, for example, pretend to go left, but then I go right, or I can move left and then all of a sudden switch to the right-hand side. I can back up a little bit and then circle off. So I try and make it as deceptive as I possibly can. While I'm doing that with my footwork, I'm still firing fast combinations, okay? That's really important. I'm still working my evasive tactics if he starts chasing me. I'm still working feints and false attacks, and I'm trying to put everything in. That's the hard part. That's why you have to train this. It's really important. So it might only look like, 4 things that you have to work, but when you start putting it into perspective against an opponent, it's actually quite a lot of stuff and it's going to take a long time to get it down. So one thing here, anytime you back up, you want to make sure that you never back up in a straight line, right? So if I start backing up a straight line, Nuno's just going to keep hunting me, and eventually he's going to knock me out. So it's really, really important that if I find myself backing up, that I immediately circle off. Preferably always, and the way that I like to coach this, is try to get guys to circle off straight away, especially if they're under pressure. I mean, if Nuno's just standing still, and he's not going anywhere, I don't need to move, right? But if he starts pushing forward, it's very important that I circle straight off. And I'm hoping that kind of action happens, where the guy launches into his attack, I move out the way and he flies past me. Well, that's great, because that's perfect for me. So again, non-rhythmical footwork, okay? You want to make sure you're not always doing the same thing over and over and over. If you catch yourself doing that, you have to switch it up. You're up on your toes. One of the things is I always do with runners is I make sure they're on their toes and their heels always off the ground, so you're nice and light. Okay? You don't want to base yourself because you want to make sure you're able to move all the time. Nuno's punching, I'm changing up my footwork, and I'm playing around. While that's happening, I'm working in all my fast combinations and my evasive tactics. So really, really important. More of a concept, but it's something, as long as you keep it in mind when you're sparring, you're working the runner style, you're almost guaranteed you'll pull something off like that.
In this example, Kay, with black gloves and black shorts, is working non-rhythmical footwork out of the runner style.
Okay, so let's recap quickly the runner style. So a couple of things you want to do, right? You want to make sure that you're firing fast combinations. As a runner, you've got to be quick. So it's really important that you train quick, fast combinations. But very important, you want to, as you start moving forward, of course, and you're trying to get in, you're going to use your evasive tactics to get in, fast combinations, and evasive tactics to get out. Very, very important. Remember, as you get out, that you want to make sure that as you're getting out of this, that you're not backing up in a straight line so the guy can hunt you down. You want to be an elusive target. So as you're defending and you're backing out, you're circling off. Okay. Next thing you want to make sure that you do is you work in feints and false attacks. So while you're out here and you're playing around, you're still playing the kind of rim shot range, I might go boom, boom, catch him, and then decide to go in and then do the same thing again. So I will use that as my entry. Your feints and false attacks you use as an entry to get into doing what? Quick, fast combinations. Okay? Next thing, really important, is you want to work that modified duck to the overhand. So this is really good when you find that somebody's really taller than you and he's firing a jab and he's keeping you at bay. So every time you try to get in, uses his jab and I can't get in, right? So if I see that happen, I can use the modified duck to come over the top. Last thing, While all this is happening, I want to have non-rhythmical footwork. So I want to be up on my toes, moving around. Don't even know where I'm coming at. Blah, blah, blah. Combinations, moving around. Boom, boom, feint. And I'm playing that runner style. Again, the only negative side of this, I guess, is that you need to be really, really fit. So it's hard to play a runner style if you don't have a good cardio. You have to make sure that you work your cardio as well.
In this final example, Nuno, with the black gloves, is working all the tactics, all 4 strategies out of the runner style against Costa with the white gloves.
The Fight Compass DVD is really, we put it together because we want to give people more of a grounding, a map, so they can kind of look at the sparring game and just, decipher it a little bit better. A lot of the stuff that we talk about on the DVD is more conceptual than technique. We're not necessarily teaching specific technique, although there is some technique, of course, but it's a conceptual approach. So that's my advice to people watching the DVD. Don't look at it purely from a technical standpoint. Look at it more from a conceptual standpoint. Listen to what I'm saying. What are you trying to achieve? So when I say in attack by drawing, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create purposeful openings so this opponent goes for the opening so I can counter strike. That's a concept more than it is a technique. Now, in playing that, as you play around with that, you're going to come up with your own variations. You'll be quite surprised, actually, just how resourceful people can really be and the kind of things that they can come up with. So the DVD really is an introduction to understanding sparring more from a conceptual framework. It's giving them a map. It's, it's seeing the entire forest instead of just seeing one tree. So, you're getting a big picture overview of what the sparring game is and what it can be and how you can utilize it, right? And we're not really looking at how do you counter a runner or how do you counter a pressurer. We're looking at if you feel that you are a pressurer, or at least that's part of your dominant style, what are the 4 main things that you can do to improve that? And then the idea is that you want to take that and that must become your homework, your goals, and you want to set those into motion every time you step on the mat and say, okay, I've decided that I am a counter stroke or at least a pressure stroke counter striker, and I'm going to make sure that those 8 strategies, I build them as many times as I can into all the sparring sessions that I encounter. Now, it's going to be frustrating because sometimes those strategies are going to go really well, other times they're not. Sometimes they're not going to work that well against other people. What do? You can try a different strategy, of course, or you can keep just plugging away at it because maybe you're not getting it right because your timing is out, or you don't have the confidence to do that. And I think that's a really important point here when we talk about sparring, is that sparring is not a one-dimensional framework. It's not just a physical technique. Well, if I have a good jab and a good cross and a good hook and I know how to bob and weave, then I'm going to be a good striker. That's not really true. It's 3-dimensional because it has more components to it. It's the physical component, it's the mental component, it's the emotional component, right? So you can have all the physical techniques, so you can do really well in training on the mitts, on the bag, wherever. You look like you know what you're doing, you've got the physical techniques, then you step into sparring and you can't pull any of it off because that might be directly related to your mental game. Maybe you don't trust your techniques once you're actually sparring. Maybe you have high expectations when you step over to the emotional game. Maybe you get so anxious about it, basically your anxiety just friggin' goes right out the roof, that you're so hyper that you can't even calm down and settle in and focus on the sparring match. So you've got to think about when things aren't working, you say, oh, well, these strategies from the Fight Compass aren't working. Don't just look at it and say, oh, it's just the strategy that doesn't work. No, look at it from lots of different perspectives. Look at it, okay, one, look at the physical technique, look at the emotional component, what was happening when you were trying to do it emotionally, what was happening mentally when you were trying to do it, and what was your opponent doing, Maybe he was using the right thing at the right time to counter that, and you didn't switch it up, you didn't change it and try something else. Like anything, if you don't change strategy up, if you don't try and mix and match the strategy, you become predictable, and if you become predictable, then it's easy for somebody to beat you. The one thing I want to talk about, it's really important on this DVD to understand, is that we're looking at the 4 predominant styles of the fight compass, being the pressurer, the runner, the angler, and the counter striker. Nobody is ever one specific style. There's always going to be a variation. I've never met somebody who is only a pressurer unless he's unskilled and doesn't know what he's doing, and he just storms in and does crazy stuff and then ends up getting knocked out anyway. I mean, it's not a very intelligent way to spar. So most people are going to be a variation. So as I mentioned throughout the DVD, the one thing that I'm really strong at is I'm really good at pressuring and I'm really good at counter striking. Those are the two things. My predominant style though is pressurer. So I'm not predominantly a counter striker. I'm predominantly a pressurer, but I do use counter striking as well. So for example, I might use counter striking to get into being a pressurer. So that's really the strategy that I'm looking at. So for example, somebody who may be a runner, but may also be a counter striker. So depending on which way you look at it, if he's predominantly a runner, he may use counter striking to get better running techniques and run better and work faster and quicker combinations. So he may hang back, you know, as the person comes in, fast combinations off the counter striker, then move and move off. So he'll use that. So it's really important to understand that these are only, we're breaking it down into the 4 predominant styles to make it easier to understand, but ultimately you need to look at the fight compass and say, which are my 2 predominant strengths? There's going to be one that's going to be more stronger than the other, but there's going to be 2 things that you like to play, and those become your 2 strengths, and those are the ones that you want to play off each other. You want to take the 4 strategies from the one, 4 strategies from the other one, combine them together, and see where you can use them, right? Now, even though I am a pressurer and a counter striker, and I use counter striking to pressure, that doesn't mean that I don't use pressuring to counter strike. Sometimes I'll put pressure on somebody and then back up, knowing what? That he's going to come in. When he comes in, then I counter strike. So if you start looking like this, the possibilities are endless. I mean, we're just giving you an introduction to the fight compass, but you can really get a lot of depth out of this information if you really sit down and start playing around with different ideas. So again, understanding four different predominant styles. There's going to be variations. All right, you need to understand that. The whole DVD, the idea behind this DVD is to show you just the specifics. So if we're looking just at a pressurer, what are the 4 basic fundamental strategies that you can use in order to enhance that specific style? And then we go through all 4 of them, and then of course you can combine the 2 that you feel that you identify with as being your 2 strongest ones, and then play off those.